From CN8, the Comcast network, recognized with an Emmy Award for Outstanding Talk Program for the second consecutive year. It's Your Call with Lynn Doyle starts now.
Whatever else history may say about me when I'm gone, I hope it will record that I appealed to your best hopes, not your worst fears, to your confidence rather than your doubts.
From all walks of life, people from different social and political backgrounds, cultural experiences, and generations are paying their respects to a man who somehow was able to relate to just about everyone. Former President Ronald Reagan has begun his final journey home. And tonight, we, along with much of the nation and the world, are remembering Ronald Reagan on It's Your Call. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Laura Jones, filling in for Lynn Doyle. Tonight we are dedicating the entire hour to the memory of former President Ronald Reagan. The 40th President of the United States passed away on Saturday at his home in California after a 10-year struggle with Alzheimer's disease. Tonight, as the nation mourns, we'd like to get your reaction to the news and discuss the impact of his life's work as well as the legacy he leaves behind. If you'd like to join in our discussion, we're going to be taking as many calls as we can. You can email us here at cn8.tv or take our web poll. Now, because Reagan's been called the great communicator and perhaps one of the best leaders of this generation, we're asking in our web poll, how would you rate Ronald Reagan as a leader? Do you think he is the best this generation has seen? Would you call him a good leader, or do you think he's overrated? To take our web poll, you just log on to our website at cn8.tv, scroll down, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you can register your vote. We're going to be checking in at the half hour and again at the end of the show. Now, joining me this evening to discuss the life and death of Ronald Reagan are Ed Trzanski. He's our CN8 National Security Analyst and a professor of political science at LaSalle University. James Hilty is a presidential historian and a professor of history at Temple University. He's also the author of the book Robert Kennedy, Brother, Protector. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Karen Feld. She is a journalist and a D.C. columnist. And rounding out the panel, Bill Palatucci, joining us from our studio in New Jersey. He is the co-host of the Battling Bills and is also a CN8 political analyst. Now, before we get to our panel discussion, let's bring you up to speed on the funeral preparations for the former president. The public viewing continues at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California through Tuesday evening. Now, on Wednesday, Reagan's body will be flown to Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol building. Friday, the state funeral will be held at the Washington National Cathedral, and later in that day, Reagan's body will be returned to his presidential library in California, where he will be buried during a private sunset service. Let's go now to Skip Lozier for this look back at the Gipper's career on and off Capitol Hill.
As an actor, Ronald Reagan was never even an Oscar contender in Hollywood.
Win just one for the Gipper.
But in Washington, he became one of the 20th century's legendary presidents.
America today is prouder and stronger and better.
He was a feel-good president, and after Vietnam, Watergate, and the Iran hostage ordeal, people wanted to feel good again.
Here it's a sunrise every day. Fresh new opportunities, dreams to build.
Mr. Reagan's message was always simple. Government was too big, taxes were too high, and the Soviet Union was an evil empire.
They are the focus of evil in the modern world.
It was called the Reagan Revolution. He pumped billions into defense spending, cut taxes, and saw the deficit become massive. But as communism began to crumble, he also agreed to nuclear arms control.
Dovii no provii. Trust but verify.
The halls of power were a long way from his humble beginnings in Dixon, Illinois, and his so-so football days at Eureka College. A long way, too, from recreating baseball games as a radio sports announcer, and his days as a Democratic Union official in Hollywood. But by the time he became governor of California, Mr. Reagan had become a conservative Republican. Yet even as president, he often interjected fiction into fact and didn't always seem to understand the potential impact of off-the-cuff comments, which he meant as jokes.
I'm pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
Mr. Reagan often seemed detached from reality. He first denied, then admitted the Iran-Contra deal, but he never accepted blame.
I did not know about the diversion of funds. Indeed, I didn't know there were excess funds.
He survived an assassination attempt with courage and humor early in his presidency, only to have the legacy of Iran-Contra dog him past the end of it. It was Alzheimer's disease which finally took him, slowly, devastatingly. But as she was for more than 40 years, his second wife, Nancy, was always at his side, supporting him, defending him, helping him.
Doing everything we can.
But it is this image that most people will likely remember.
Let's go now to our panel discussion. I'm going to turn to Ed Trzanski. Perhaps one of his greatest gifts was that of communication, but he was not without his flaws and not without his critics, yet he had a gift of turning critics into friends.
He certainly did. If you look at the piece by Mikhail Gorbachev, former General Secretary of the Soviet Union and Russia's first president, in today's New York Times, he recognizes as much. And if you look at the way in which Reagan ran his White House, bringing in George Bush, one of the strongest contenders for the nomination when he won it in 1980, along with Jim Baker, who had managed the Ford and Bush campaigns, making him chief of staff. Reagan had a way of spotting quality in people and also recognizing when he could deal with adversaries. So he did a very capable job.
Karen Feld, you're in Washington, D.C. It's a town that's preparing for its first state funeral in more than 30 years. Can you describe the scene there?
Well, it's interesting, Laura, because remember, there's so many people today, and particularly young voters and people even younger than that, who don't remember a state funeral. They were never, around. They're too young. I mean, I can remember when there was a state funeral for President Kennedy and everybody sat glued to TV sets. The difference is now this town is literally coming to a stop. The government has announced that they will be closed on Friday. That means virtually all the federal offices, with the exception of Homeland Security and essential employees. Streets will be closed beginning on Wednesday. Downtown, we're expecting at least 100,000 people to come in to view the body. And one additional logistical problem right now is that the security is so tight anyway around the Capitol. And there's a new Congressional Visitors Center, which is in progress. It's not supposed to be completed until 2006. So they have set up temporary structures for everyone to go through for security before that. But there is no way, as there was when LBJ lied in state, to go in through the east entrance of the Capitol. So they will have to find a way to get all the visitors from the west front through this sort of logistical tunnel and in a timely fashion into the west side.
I'm also curious, as after 9/11, there was a nonpartisan spirit in Washington, D.C. for a short amount of time. Are you sensing that there are Republicans and Democrats both putting aside their partisanship during this time of mourning?
Well, I mean, obviously, as we know, Senator Kerry has said he won't campaign for a week. I think that really what's going to happen tomorrow, Tuesday, is that there will be a resolution on both the House floor and the Senate floor, basically saying that they will postpone the defense bill and everything else until next week, and they will spend a day or two doing tributes to former President Reagan. And in that sense, both Republicans and Democrats will praise him because he's popular, and so he's popular with all of their constituents. But I do think the buzz around town, because there are a lot of cynics here and it's everybody's political animals, is will this help or hurt George Bush's reelection campaign?
All right, we're going to get into that a little bit later on into the show. Let me turn to Dr. Hilty. As a presidential historian, what do you think textbooks 50, 100 years from now, when students open their textbooks and read the bullet points underneath Ronald Reagan, what do you think the one line will be to describe his presidency?
Well, great communicator. He was one of the three most powerful communicators in the 20th century who held the presidency. I would rank him certainly along with Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt and with John Kennedy and the ability to dramatize issues. I don't think there was any president who, speaking from a prepared text, who was able to command and to lead better than Ronald Reagan.
And it's not something that you can really learn. It's just something, do you think, that came from within?
Well, I think it comes from his acting skills. He basically asked, where's my mark? Where do I stand? And what am I to say? And when he knew his lines and he was really prepared, he could be very effective. When he had to ad lib and when he had also to deal with complex policy issues, he seemed either distracted or disinterested, and it wasn't quite clear if he didn't know about them or if he just didn't want to take the time to learn.
All right, let's go to Bill Palatucci. What do you think that Ronald Reagan's legacy will be? Is it going to be that he's a great communicator or the fall of the Soviet Union? What do you think that will be?
Oh, it's at least both of those and more. He just changed the American lexicon. We had the Reagan Revolution, Reaganomics, Reagan Democrats. Ronald Reagan changed how we think in Washington. The old debate was, do we raise taxes or cut taxes? After Ronald Reagan, we no longer have that debate. The only debate we have in Washington these days is how much do we cut taxes? So he just changed the political landscape and left it unchanged. We have all these phrases now that are all so famous. We heard a couple of them. Evil empire, trust but verify. There you go again, when he teased President Carter. Are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? A vintage Reagan line. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. All of those are instantly recognizable as Ronald Reagan phrases that he made famous and identifiable with him. So, as I said, he changed everything. He is the president now that everybody is judged by. One of the most important leaders of the second half of the 20th century. When he came to office, people said that the power of the presidency was forever damaged. We had 2 failed presidencies in Ford and Carter, but Reagan put it all back together.
Ed, he was definitely a man who knew how to deliver a line, and also someone who seemed to be very optimistic, very upbeat, and it was kind of contagious.
Well, he was an old young man.
What do you mean by that?
Obviously, he was quite along in age, the oldest man to take the office of president and to leave the office as president. But his youth, he had this spirit of youth and vigor in terms of his ideas. And I don't dispute that he was a great communicator, but I think sometimes people sell him short in terms of the quality of the ideas he had and the fact that he developed this worldview over a very long time. Ronald Reagan had a coherent worldview that had to do with espousing American values and liberty and opposing totalitarianism that was developed over a career of 40 years. And it wasn't just that when he was elected to the presidency, somebody handed him a script with a series of ideas. He had spent a very long time talking to the American people in various venues. And as a result, I think it's not just that he knew the lines, but they came from the heart. And he's responsible really for the policies that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the greatest expansion of freedom in recorded history.
Laura, if I can, Ed's exactly right. He also, though, had those core principles on the domestic level. Ed just talked about his famous '63 speech for Barry Goldwater, where he laid out his views of the world, but both domestically and internationally. And he stayed with those. They never wavered. They never changed. You learn in politics sometimes the politician is either good in style or substance. And I think Reagan really had both. He was good on the style and good in the substance. You don't get elected the governor of California. You don't beat Jimmy Carter, a sitting president. You don't beat Walter Mondale. You don't beat Mikhail Gorbachev in negotiating with the Soviet Union if you have no substance. Reagan had both.
All right.
I think there are 2 other things.
Karen?
One is he had such optimism and really believed in the American dream.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to get you to pick that point up on the other side of the break. We are just getting started here on It's Your Call. If you have a story or some thoughts you'd like to share, you can give us a call or email us here at cn8.tv. Back in a moment.
If you'd like to email Lynn during the show, type in www.cn8.tv. On our homepage, look under CN8 Programs. Click on It's Your Call, and then look to the left to find our email invitation. If your email is read during the show, you'll receive an It's Your Call baseball hat. If you miss an episode of It's Your Call, don't worry. If you have digital cable, you can watch Lynn anytime on demand. Check your local area to see if you get local, then watch It's Your Call anytime, day or night.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ronald Reagan was known for his eloquent speaking skills, and that was just one of his famous phrases that will no doubt live throughout history. And tonight, here on It's Your Call, we are remembering the former president, Ronald Reagan, and we're going to be doing the same throughout the week here on the program. News of his death has leaders both past and present around the world and close to home sharing their thoughts on a man known as the Great Communicator.
And I think throughout his term in office, he was obviously very worthy of the moniker that was put on him, that is the Great Communicator. He was always able to express his very clearly held views in a concise and sometimes inspirational way.
Though Ronald Reagan has been ill for a long time, the finality of all of this is going to hit the American people very hard. And Barbara and I mourn the loss of a great president, and for us, a great friend.
I always liked being with him. And even when we had our differences about domestic policy, the one thing I liked about him was that he was not mean-spirited. He was always optimistic about our country, and he believed that freedom was a universal value.
My aide called and told me, and I immediately thought, another person has left this world, left behind a giant footprint. And I thought, probably, this is a relief for him. 10 hard years for him. It's a very difficult fate. And then I began to remember our meetings. I actually think he is a great president.
Back now to our panel discussion. I want to talk to James Hilty about Ronald Reagan. Many people underestimated him. And this is something that he actually liked, the fact that people underestimated him. For instance, they never thought he would bring an end to the Cold War, that they would bring down that wall.
Well, he had a certain resolve about him, and he certainly was driven by an ideology. It was very consistent, I think, as Ed said early. He picked that up. He had been an ideological person really back when he was young also, as a young labor leader and a liberal Democrat. He really believed. And when he shifted to the Republican Party, he carried a new kind of conservative ideology into the Republican Party. And I think people were surprised, as you suggest, when he was able to basically turn the party. One of Reagan's legacies is that the moderate wing of the Republican Party was virtually eliminated in the 1980s as the party became, in effect, the conservative party. And that's no small achievement. He, in effect, made his ideas prevail. And he did it in a very courtly, very quiet way, as President Clinton said. He believed in the notion of comity. It's an old-fashioned term, C-O-M-I-T-Y, or the notion of comatose relationships in which you respect the other person. You agree to disagree, but you don't become disagreeable while you're doing it. Tip O'Neill's biography is very reflective of this kind of Reagan, the kind that you expected could not achieve, but then you turned around and you said to yourself, how in the world did he get all those programs through a democratically dominated Congress in 1981 and 82? And you have to respect him for that.
I would add to that, too, though, that yes, I agree with everything Jim says. At the same time, he was not afraid of actions that were unpopular. Reagan was very insistent that the United States placed Pershing missiles in Europe. This was very unpopular in Europe at the time, led to massive demonstrations in the country. Had it not happened for that, you would not have had the INF Treaty, which was the first time that an entire class of nuclear weapons was taken off the table. And certainly Gorbachev deserves credit for going along, but it was Reagan who pushed him and really gave him very little wiggle room. In fact, very quickly, a story. Gorbachev, when he was in Philadelphia, I sat with one of his policy aides, and we conversed, and we talked about Reagan, and he said, you know, General Secretary liked Bush much more, meaning President Bush 41. And I said, why? And he said, well, you could negotiate with him. With Reagan, it always had to be his way. And I said, well, that explains why Reagan was a two-term president and Bush was only a one-termer.
Well, he was definitely someone who was loved. But Karen, he was also somebody who was criticized for huge deficits, painful spending cuts. And there were controversies, the Iran-Contra arms sale deal with Iran to fund so-called freedom fighters in Nicaragua. So he's a person who right now we're remembering a lot of the good, but he definitely had his strong critics, and he's not without controversy.
Well, that's true, but he was so much like Teflon that it kind of bounced off. And I think also that when someone is gone, we try to remember the good. And what's happened with Reagan, also the last thing we remember was 10 years ago when he got up and gave that, in essence, a farewell speech acknowledging that he had Alzheimer's. And I think he did it with such dignity that people respected. He brought that into the forefront. It wasn't talked about before. I mean, it's a whole new thing of what happens. So I think that what happens is that we remember the good. I mean, he talked about cutting government. In fact, he just eliminated one agency, Civil Aeronautics, which there was no need for anyway after the Carter administration, deregulating it, the airline industry. But at the same time, there were huge deficits, but it all of a sudden didn't matter. You know, he could build up defense budget. But nothing else mattered because he had a sense of humor and he had the charisma, and in some ways there was a glamour that united Hollywood, Washington, everything else, but there was also this idea that it was the American dream. An actor could be president. Here's someone who went to Eureka College, not Harvard or Yale, and here they are in the White House. He would take the young people that worked for him, and that goes for even interns, and he would invite them into the Oval Office and help them solve their problems, and he really tried to mentor them along. So there was like that real person there there wasn't just the guy behind all the closed doors that nobody could access.
Yeah, Bill Palatucci, there are so many people, many Republicans who want to pattern themselves after Ronald Reagan and try and tap into that secret formula that he seemed to have that came so naturally, yet people, so many people in office, running for office, they just can't capture that. Is that something that just comes from within, or is it something that you think can be taught on the campaign trail? I know you've been around a lot of campaigns.
Yeah, it's few and far between when you find candidates and politicians who can, as I said earlier, have both the style and the substance. Usually find them with one or the other, or a little bit of one and a lot of the other. In my workings, the guy who came closest to that was Governor Tom Kean, who, like Reagan, was the nicest guy one-on-one, was very humble and friendly, but had all the substance that you could want, and could go toe-to-toe with anybody in those policies. And I think, I don't know how much Kean got that from Reagan, but Reagan certainly, is, as you say, that prototype for a lot of candidates in the modern age. I think too that candidates today are mean-spirited, and they forget how effective Reagan was with a smile and with his outreach to the other side. He got his opponents to kind of back down. Again, the term Reagan Democrats. I ran the 1984 re-election campaign for Ronald Reagan here in New Jersey. Huge landslide, as it was everywhere. But Reagan Democrats was a real phenomenon. There were hundreds of thousands of registered Democrats who, like Reagan, felt that the party had abandoned them.
Okay, Bill, there's more to come as It's Your Call continues at the half hour. Up next, we're going to take a look at Ronald Reagan's relationship with the love of his life, Nancy. Plus, your calls. Stay with us as It's Your Call continues. From California to Washington and to Wall Street, people across the country are preparing to say goodbye to former President Ronald Reagan. Earlier today at the Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, an emotional Nancy Reagan laid her head down on the casket of her late husband to bid farewell. After that, a long line of mourners started filing in to pay their final respects. This public memorial in California is expected to continue throughout the night into Tuesday evening. And on Wednesday, the president's body will be moved to Washington, D.C., where he will lie in state until Friday, which has been declared a national day of mourning. We're glad to have you here this evening as It's Your Call remembers former President Ronald Reagan. I'm Laura Jones in for Lynn Doyle. And if you'd like to join in our discussion this evening, we'd love to hear from you. You can give us a call or email us here at cn8.tv, or you can also take our web poll. Now, joining me this evening to discuss the life and legacy of former President Ronald Reagan is Ed Trzanski. He's our CN8 national security expert and a professor of political science at LaSalle University. James Hilty is a presidential historian and professor of history at Temple University. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Karen Feld. She is a journalist and a D.C. columnist. And rounding out the panel is Bill Palatucci, who joins us from our studio in New Jersey. He's co-host of the Battling Bills here on CN8 and a CN8 political analyst. Now, Karen, I want to go to you first and talk a little bit about the love relationship between Nancy Reagan and the president. Has that town ever seen a love relationship so sincere?
Not in my lifetime, Laura. She was very protective of him. I think that they were really in love through all the years. If she wanted him to do something, he did, and if she didn't, he didn't do it. I mean, I can remember when she was seeing psychics, and if it was going to be a bad day for him, she would make him change, flights, appointments, whatever it was. But she was very loyal up until the end, as we saw during the whole 10 years that he was so sick. I mean, it really had to be very, very difficult for her, and she stuck by him. She maintained the privacy. She would maintain the dignity. They also had some very close friends in the kitchen cabinet that came here with them, and I know today the Wicks were at the library at the service there, and they're probably the only remaining couple now that came here with the Reagans. But it was a very close-knit group, and I know he said that he believed in family values, although he didn't always practice them. And I think, a lot of that was there was a lot of turmoil with the kids who really were quite jealous of his relationship with Nancy and felt that she took precedent over them. I think the other thing that's interesting is Nancy had once said that she was the only person that he talked to about his divorce to Jane Wyman. He never talked publicly about it. In fact, in his book, it was like one paragraph.
Right, he did keep a number of personal items very personal, even in his book. Right. Ed, I want to talk to you. You could not help but be moved when you saw Nancy Reagan put her head down. While the country is not necessarily surprised by the passing, it's never easy. Anybody who's suffered, watched a loved one suffer through an illness, it's never easy. And I think the whole country is mourning with her. Heavens,
just imagine 52 years together and to have the kind of close marriage they did, and each of us who has experienced that kind of loss of a loved one knows what this is. The one thing that I think may be of rather immediate consequence as a result of this very close relationship is that Mrs. Reagan has become very outspoken recently on the issue of stem cell research to try to cure Alzheimer's and other diseases, and the potential that research has. It's a very complex, controversial issue.
She's come out against the current president, George Bush, or her position is in opposition to his.
Yes, she did, and today, I believe 52 senators wrote to the president asking him to rethink his position on that one issue. And Mrs. Reagan had always maintained a proper distance from whatever policies the president had set. She never put herself out in front as a spokesperson. In this particular case, I think she is speaking for herself, but in his behalf and on behalf of all those families going through similar tragedies. And again, it's complex, it's difficult, and it's highly unusual for Mrs. Reagan to take this step, but I think it's so terrible that she's decided she had to be part of the discussion.
Dr. Hilton, let me talk to you about her role as a First Lady and how her role helped define other First Ladies' roles. Would you say that she did a good job as First Lady? Did she set a different standard, or did she keep status quo?
Well, there seems to be certain types of First Ladies. Some of them are sort of homebound, nice wives, stay quiet in the background. Bess Truman, Mamie Eisenhower leap to mind in that regard. And then there are others that in some cases end up having sort of royal names attached to them, like Mrs. Harding was called the Duchess, and there were times in which Mrs. Reagan was thought of as almost the queen of the court in Washington. And one thinks of Jackie Kennedy as sort of the princess of Camelot. And those kinds of First Ladies are more, I suppose, involved or more important in their husbands' lives in terms of sort of their stately position, unlike Hillary Clinton or Eleanor Roosevelt, who in fact were deeply involved in politics and policies both. And one also, a very well forgotten First Lady, Herbert Hoover's wife, was in fact very active and became involved, one of the First Ladies to become involved in running things for the Girl Scouts and the American Red Cross and things of that sort. One thinks also of Edith Bowling Wilson, who in fact ran the White House when her husband was ill the last few months. You know, of all of the things that we think about in the Reagan presidency, and a lot of people contemplate how soon or at what point did the Alzheimer's take hold. There is this awful thought that, you know, at one point, maybe given his age, that he might have already suffered some of the effects of this or some of the symptoms of it very early on. And in that case, she takes an even more important role. I think there's a story yet to be told about her, if you would, nursing of his health while he was president.
Bill Tallahassee, let me go up to you, and I know we've got some callers who are waiting on the line to join in the conversation, but let me just get your thoughts on watching Nancy Reagan this afternoon. Very emotional, something that touches a lot of people, and it's something that is probably, and we're going to get into that a little bit later too, is factoring in the political picture about, you know, about Republicans and a good feeling.
Well, I think it's a little too early to talk about any political impact. He's just passed away, and we're going to have this entire week of events and national mourning, and I think we'll look at those questions next week. I think you go back to your comments and your talk about Nancy Reagan. I think, listen, we've heard her call him today not only her husband but hero, as he was to so many people, Republicans and Democrats. So I think again, this is a guy who was on the world stage with Pope John Paul II, with leaders all over Europe, Margaret Thatcher. These were the 80s when these massive issues were in front of us. So I think for Nancy Reagan to see this hero pass, who led us through those tough times, and so definitely, I think it must be both the personal tragedy and also kind of the loss of this larger-than-life figure.
All right, I want to go to some phone calls now. I know there are a number of people waiting on the lines. Let's talk to Stephen. Stephen, it's good to have you here. It's your call.
Good evening. I feel what Mrs. Reagan went through because my mother-in-law has been an Alzheimer's patient for almost 10 years. But being retired military, I served from 75 to 95. My first tour to Germany was with President Reagan when he put the Pershing missiles out. And what I will most remember about is my second tour when he, with the president telling Gorbachev to tear the wall down. I was in Germany when the wall fell. I went to the border after the East German guards basically deserted, got part of the fence, and went there again on during unification, and they loved Reagan over there.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. Let's go to our next call. Let's talk to Jim now. Jim, it's your call. Good to have you here. Jim, are you with us? Jim, can you hear us?
Your call.
Oh, okay. Are you there? Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm a World War II
All right, I don't think that we can hear him, unfortunately. Maybe we'll try and get Jim back on the phone. Ed Trzanski, let me turn to you and just talk a little bit about Reagan has an impact on so many aspects of modern day life, from the social, the political, and the economics. We didn't even get onto Reaganomics.
Well, in terms of the economy, what was very interesting is Reagan took office determined to shrink the size of government and to allow Americans to hang on to more of their own money. On the second score, he was very successful in terms of cutting taxes and in stimulating the greatest economic expansion in post-war history. He was less successful in curtailing the size of government directly, but as David Stockman, his budget chief, said, what they couldn't do directly, they did indirectly. And through tax cuts created this system in which they, in effect, created large budget deficits that forced government to shrink against its own will. We wrestle with that in some form or other up until the present time. And there, it's interesting that Reagan did not leave an heir as much as he left a movement and a set of conditions that we have to wrestle with in some cases, and in others, from which we derive tremendous benefits.
Okay, we are going to take a commercial break, but as we go to the break, we're going to take a look live in California, where the president, where mourners are lining up to pay their final respects to former President Ronald Reagan. Just ahead on It's Your Call, we're going to be talking about more about the life and death of Ronald Reagan, as well as the impact his passing could have on the upcoming presidential campaign. First, though, here's what some of our viewers had to say about how history will remember the Gipper.
I think he'll be remembered as a great president. He had a major effect on the world and on the country, and was an honest, decent guy.
One of the world's greatest presidents. I think we're going to miss him greatly. I think it's interesting that a lot of people don't really appreciate somebody until they're gone. And that's the case with him, I think.
He's done a great job for the country when he was president, and I think now that he has passed away, everybody is honoring him, which I think he deserved.
He always told us that for America, the best was yet to come. We comfort ourselves in the knowledge that this is true for him, too. His work is done, and now a shining city awaits him. May God bless Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan and many of us disagreed on one issue or another, but he always disagreed with a smile, without partisanship. He always put America first. And I think he had a sense of idealism and a sense of optimism and the possibilities about our country that defines leadership. We will miss him, no matter what party, no matter what our beliefs. He was a leader, and we'll miss him.
The presumptive Democratic nominee for president, Senator John Kerry, has said this is the time to put politics aside, and he suspended his campaign activities for the week, and a number of Bush campaign events, those too have been put aside. Let me go to Bill Palatucci. I know on Friday there will be no political ads running. This is not a good move on both the campaigns, but especially for John Kerry, is it not?
Not a good move. Yes, I mean it is a good move. Obviously,
right, it is a good move.
Yes, to take the day off on Friday, of course, with all the events that will take place that day. They're going to close the government. The stock exchange is not going to open, so of course it makes sense to take the ads down. I think the impact of this it reminds people of what a strong leader Ronald Reagan was, true to his conservative principles. In truth, if you look at George Bush 41 and George Bush 43, our current president is much closer to Reagan in terms of his ideals and his conservative thoughts and positions. And I think, let's face it, this race in the fall is going to come down to base who can get their voters out to the polls. And I think inadvertently, Reagan's passing kind of reminds the Republican base of why they are conservatives, what they thought about him, what it meant to take on the world, as Ed said earlier, putting Persian missiles in the middle of Europe, very controversial, very tough move, but one that drew a lot of support ultimately. And I think when there are some parallels there to looking what we're going through in Iraq and Bush standing firm and staying the course. So I think in these just initial days, I said at the outset, it's hard to tell, but I think there's some benefit that that goes to Bush in what is obviously, the most tragic of events.
Yeah, Karen, on some of the shows I've been watching throughout the day, a lot of people are saying, gosh, it feels kind of uncomfortable talking about the campaign, but it is a reality. But they were saying, some Democrats, not going on camera, but they're talking about, boy, if this had happened in September, October, this could be something that really helps George Bush. And again, it could remind the country why they like conservatives, because the country is not overly liberal.
Everything is timing, Laura, and had it happened closer to the election, yes, I think it would have given President Bush a bigger bump. On another note, one thing that we really can't forget about the legacy of Ronald Reagan is the imprint that he left on the Supreme Court. He appointed 3 justices, and the most conservative people on the court that we have today. Scalia, Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female on the court, and that's an important thing. I mean, look what's come out of the court as a result. And what will in the future. So I think that people also, if they think of that, might keep that in mind, whichever way they vote, that that's an important job that the president has to do.
Dr. Hilter, you wanted to bring up, follow up on that point.
Well, I wanted to follow up on what Bill said about the impact of Reagan's policies on the Bush administration. I think you can see the nascent Bush doctrine within the Reagan administration, the invasion of Grenada without, a Commonwealth citizen, or a Commonwealth country rather, without even asking Margaret Thatcher first. The decision to go after the head of Libya, to Gaddafi, and just basically the notion that's built within this this context of using American military force whenever you feel like you should. And built underneath that are 2 notions that Reagan embodied. One is the preeminence of the United States, not as an equal superpower with the Soviet Union. Tear down that wall, Mr. Gorbachev, is not a question. That's not a negotiating point. That's a command. He's saying, in effect, look, understand you're number 2 and we're number 1. And the second part of it is the notion of American exceptionalism, the city on a hill, drawn from Massachusetts Bay, from the Puritan experience, and the notion that America is truly not to be compared to any other country in the world. You see those ideas embodied in the Bush Doctrine, for good or for bad. And right now, I think, as we're looking at Iraq, it's a very debatable issue.
And do you think that there'll be comparisons drawn on the economic front between Reagan and Bush, especially when it comes to that Reaganomics, tax cuts, yet huge deficits? Will people compare those factors to George Bush, for better or worse?
I think they will, but as we're talking about Bush and Kerry, let's keep in mind that this election will largely be determined by events. And something will happen in Iraq, not likely with the economy, because it appears to be moving in a certain direction that's going to take it off the table as an issue. But certainly something may happen abroad. And as Karen mentioned, if this event that we're talking about had now happened sometime in late September, it very likely could have portended to Bush's benefit. But people will look at Bush in his performance overseas and will measure his effectiveness. And also, I think where the Reagan example is a bit more perilous for those who are quick to say that it's good for Bush. Reagan had an articulate mannerism about him so that everyone understood the issue. He was eloquent. He had spent 40 years thinking and talking about this. And if there's one weakness in Bush's game, is that he sometimes can't bring the rest of us along to explain what is happening and why it's happening in such a way that people are comfortable and they know what's being done.
Bill Palatucci, I know you're trying to jump in. Go ahead.
Well, a couple quick things I could say to counter what Ed just said. Current President Bush has his own eloquence. It's plain speaking. He connects with folks, unlike this patrician John Kerry. What I want to get to, and Ed, 1 million jobs this year is an event that it will not go off the table. But more importantly, I think there is a player that will be involved the rest of the year, and that is Nancy Reagan. She knows George Bush, and I think they are close. The stem cell research issue aside, and George Bush, while that issue is not done, it's just gotten started. The president's appointed a commission to study it, and we may hear more from the president on that issue. But you saw Nancy Reagan today and had her office. One of the first things that they talked about was they thanked this current president for his cooperation and his call. I think Nancy Reagan is a very, very smart Washington player. And again, not that she's going to politicize this, but she is close to the Bushes. She is going to remain active, and she cares about her husband's legacy, and that legacy is tied to this election.
All right, Bill, thanks so much. Up next, we're going to be taking our last call of the evening. That plus some final thoughts from our panel. We're going to, go out with a live shot from California as mourners gather to pay their final respects to Ronald Reagan. Stay with us as It's Your Call continues in just a moment. Our last call tonight comes from Jim. Jim, are you there? It's good to have you here.
I'm here.
All right, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hey, Lynn, you're doing an excellent job.
Oh,
I'm glad.
Well, thank you.
He's the greatest man this country ever had. He'll go down in history as the one who saved the world. And Lincoln, of course, saved the country, but Reagan saved the world. And when you look at the whole past, there was more criticism probably than there are of Bush right now. They said he was a quick draw individual. They said he was just an actor and couldn't control money. But when he took over California as governor, it was in the red, and he made that in the black again. He had plenty of experience, and people don't give him credit for that. They don't give him credit for destroying the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
He destroyed the Russians without firing one shot on one American boy killed. Sure, we had a deficit. So what? I'd rather have a deficit that way than my way. I was World War II veteran over in Okinawa, and I saw what war does.
All right, we thank you so much for calling in. Let's go to some final thoughts from our panel before we leave you this evening. And let me start up in New Jersey. Bill Palatucci, your final thoughts?
Well, Laura, I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. I think that caller said it well. Reagan was somebody who connected with all of us. He was a hero to so many. He was one of my political heroes.
All right, Karen Feld, your final thoughts.
I think that Reagan redefined the Republican Party, and particularly the conservative end of it, and I think that the Republicans today will do everything they can to perpetuate that in his legacy.
Dr. Hilty.
Well, I think there was a mixed legacy. I think there's a great irony between the man and his policies. He was quite affable, but he also used some unyielding words to describe welfare queens and people who are out of work who should basically just go get a job, and I think that legacy is yet to be worked out.
All right, Ed Trzanski, you have the final word.
I think Ronald Reagan helped us believe the best about ourselves and our country, and he gave us hope for the future, and that's his enduring legacy, and we are much better off for having had him. He was a wonderful man and a great president and responsible for the greatest expansion of human freedom in recorded history.
All right, thank you all to the panel for participating. Before we leave you this evening, a programming note, we'll be continuing our coverage of the life and death of Ronald Reagan on Wednesday and Thursday night here on It's Your Call. Tomorrow night, we're going to be discussing the latest from the Scott Peterson trial. Now, we leave you this evening from these words from Ronald Reagan just before he left office. I'm Laura Jones. Have a good night.
My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.